it's a long time. You know, the Labour leader to win a general election before Keir Starmer was Tony Blair. And I think the biggest difference, I don't think I've said this to you before because I've only just realised it in the last 30 minutes. The biggest difference between Tony Blair and Keir Starmer, and this ties in with the other story today about people getting their news from different sources. Keir Starmer has to break with the fear of the newspaper headlines, break with the fear of the front pages, front page-phobia. There you go. He has to. I'll tell you why briefly. The caller so far of a piece with the idea that we send too many people to jail, right? Imagine for a moment a very lazy right-wing tabloid opinionator, somebody who thought that Brexit would be a good idea but couldn't tell you why. Somebody who constantly invites you to be terrified of immigrants without really telling you why. Just think, you know, exactly the type I've got in mind. A very lazy right-wing commentator. And if they are currently professing to be frightened about people being released from jail or worried about what it might mean for your mum or your community, how would they feel if instead of going to jail, offenders, initially non-violent offenders, were emptying your bins or sweeping up your street? So he has to. Well, the things that he does, if he is genuinely to improve the state of the nation, the single simplest step he needs to take first is to cut his entire administration loose from front page-phobia, because the people who write the biggest front pages are a huge part of the problems that we're currently in. Enemies of the people attacking the judges. You know, crush the saboteurs attacking democratically elected politicians. Who the hell elected Paul Dacre? Who elected Viscount Rothermere? Who elected the Barclay brothers or Andrew Neil? Who elected these people? These front pages that previous governments, previous administrations have been frightened of. The very first thing that Keir Starmer needs to do, and I think possibly with the winter fuel payments and possibly with a speech he's set to give later today about trade unions, is actually tell the rabble-rousing, unevidenced, provocative print media in this country that he doesn't really care what they say anymore. Whereas Tony Blair would argue that he absolutely had to. I've asked him about that, and he kind of conceded that he probably bent a little bit too far to accommodate the Rupert Murdochs of this world. I mean, certainly ending up godfather to one of his children constitutes, I would say, a bend too far. But he would still argue that he had little choice, such was the necessity of pragmatism in politics. I don't think Starmer needs to worry about these people, that put them on the Bibi Stockholm kind of attitude or send them to Rwanda. I don't think anyone getting paid for their opinions would suggest sending them to Rwanda. But that for me, front page-phobia. If Keir Starmer proves not to suffer from front page-phobia, then he's got a chance of pulling this off. Two questions: how did we get into such an almighty mess? And I guess with those words ringing in my ears, the confidence with which I say most people are good. Most people are persuaded to believe stupid things. Anybody persuaded to believe that what is happening now with regard to our justice system and our prison release is down to the current government has been seduced into a position of stupidity. You weren't born that way, but look at the effort put into making you that way. And that renders the second question particularly pertinent. What else were they supposed to do? Okay, true or false? True or false? Before the election, a week before the general election, so before the Farage riots, before any of the problems that have contributed to but not caused the current crisis in sentencing, a week before the general election, senior police officers wrote to the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, warning him that a failure to trigger SDS 40, which is what is essentially being implemented today, but it needs to be triggered weeks in advance, would be exploited by criminals. True or false? In a letter dated June 27, Sir Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and two other chief constables warned that the overcrowding crisis in prisons a week before the general election was hampering police officers' ability to do their job. True or false? They urged Rishi Sunak to announce the SDS 40 measure immediately because it would take, and I quote, or of course I don't if it's false, many weeks to safely implement. Rishi Sunak will stand up in the House of Commons tomorrow and possibly try to make political capital out of a crisis caused by his deliberate and despicable decision to ignore the advice he was receiving from the most senior police officer in the country and 2 of his colleagues, because, spoiler alert, it's true. The Times has seen the letter. So there it is. A week before the election, when the Farage riots were an unknown, not even a glimmer upon the horizon of our country. A week before the election, Mark Rowley, 2 other chief constables, telling the Prime Minister in terms that if he didn't do what Keir Starmer is doing now, we would have an even worse situation on our hands. And what are the people who stuck up for Rishi Sunak going to do? They're going to start attacking Keir Starmer for doing what Rishi Sunak should have done. And that is why I seem a little bit obsessed sometimes with what I increasingly consider to be truly corrupt reporting. It's either intellectually corrupt, as in, well, why don't we just stick them all on the Bibi Stockholm, or it's morally corrupt, as in, let's not mention the fact that this is all Rishi Sunak's fault. Let's try and turn it into a stick with which to beat Keir Starmer. And it matters. But it doesn't matter as much as it used to, I don't think. And that's why front page-phobia, if Keir Starmer doesn't have it, that could prove to be one of the most significant elements of his premiership.